Welcome to this edition of My Life. I'm your host, Ed Brakefield, and I'm with a good friend of mine, Chuck Peringian. Charlie is an official in Addison Township. He's one of the board members of the Addison Township Park and Recreation. So tell us a little bit about your life, Charlie, your early years, which was very interesting, and part of your park, what you do at the parks.
Well, I grew up in Birmingham, and I'm a product of the Birmingham school system from kindergarten through, I graduated from Seaholm High School. And I pretty much attended all the schools in Birmingham. They were building them as I was growing up, and it seemed like every year or two I was getting transferred to a new school. And my mom and dad lived just on the north side of town where it was still pretty rural. They had a ranch house out in the country, and there was cornfields, and it was still pretty rural out there when I was growing up, which was nice.
That was Woodward, where it was 2 lanes now. It was 1 lane then?
Well, I think Woodward might be 6 or 8 lanes right now. Yeah. And back then, it might have been 4 lanes, 2 north and 2 south, going to Pontiac.
You went to school there in elementary, but at one time you kind of got yourself, you didn't get in trouble, you didn't get caught, but what did you do when you were in elementary that you had an interest in cars?
Well, as I was growing up, I started to get interested in cars, and so did most of my friends back in the middle 60s. And I worked at a lot of the local gas stations on Woodward Avenue in Royal Oak and Birmingham. And my friends also did as well.
So tell us a little bit more about your knowledge of the cars. When did you get into the interest of the cars?
Well, it seemed like when I was about 16, 17, just as well as me, most of my friends, we got interested in the cars. And it was a way of getting around besides cars being interesting. It was a good way to see your friends. There was a lot of drive-in restaurants and places to go, and it was good to have transportation so you could see your friends. And it seemed like there was a different group of friends at each restaurant or place that we'd go visit. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we'd go up to Ted's, which was up by towards Pontiac. There were drive-in restaurants more down towards Royal Oak. There was a Mavericks restaurant in Royal Oak. There was a Big Boy at 13 and a half in Woodward. There was a Big Town restaurant. That's where some of the guys with the fast cars used to hang out. And further down, there was the Totem Pole restaurant down more by 10 Mile Road. And you could spend time on the weekends going up and down Woodward Avenue with your car and visiting different circles of friends. And it seemed like there was always something to do.
So it was kind of like a happy days type thing when you would go to all the different restaurants and I would call dairy bars, if you will.
Yeah, so. It was like that a real lot. And again, there was always something going on to entertain yourself for the evening, visiting your friends, and then some of our friends had fast cars, and we found that interesting. Or you could just sit on the side of Woodward Avenue and watch people every now and then race their cars.
Yeah. And now, you lived there. Did you ever drive any of the things, or did you just watch the cars?
Well, once we got our driver's license, we became participants as well. And some of my early cars were pretty inexpensive cars. Back in the late 60s, you could get a pretty nice car for $100 or $200 or $300, and most of us had maybe late 50s Chevys or Fords or Chryslers. I kind of like 55 through 57 Chevys. That's mostly what I had. And you could easily get a car that ran halfway decent for a couple $100 and then fix it up on your own.
Well, that's really interesting. I've often wondered what it would be like to drive up and down Woodward back in the early years in the cars like that. But did you ever get in any drag racing?
Well, some of my friends did, and I might have a little bit, but some of my friends had faster cars, or quite a bit faster cars than I did, and they'd go out looking to race at night on Woodward Avenue until the police finally cracked down on it.
Well, that's kind of interesting. So did you ever get caught by the cops
No.
racing? But your buddies
No,
did.
I would get tickets for maybe not making a complete stop at a stop sign, or maybe a noisy muffler or a burned out taillight, but that was the extent of it.
So you didn't drop out of school, you went to college, and you went all the way and you went to college. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, after high school, I attended Oakland Community College for a few years. I went to Auburn Hills when it was the remnants of a Nike base in its early days. And then I transferred to Orchard Ridge when that opened up.
Okay.
And that's over by Farmington. And I took the classes I needed to take to transfer to a 4-year school. And after I completed the classes I thought I needed to take at Oakland Community College, I went to the University of Detroit, and I graduated from there.
That's interesting. But when you were in college, you kind of couldn't get away from the cars, could you? When you were there?
For spending money, I worked at a few local gas stations along Woodward Avenue, and also it was another activity that was fun to do. And one gas station that I worked at was the Shell station at Normandy and Woodward, which is 13.5 miles. And the managers of the station were partners, and one was the track announcer for Tri-City Dragway that was up in Bay City, and my other boss, his partner, was a professional drag racer. And I would often on weekends go with one or go with the other in a system, whether it was at the drag strip or just helping them out. And I continued to do that as I went to school.
Now, was that time when it really captured your interest in the drag racing, wasn't it, during the college?
Well, I was always interested in that a lot, and the car companies in the late 60s were producing high-powered cars, and some of my friends had high-powered cars, and so it was an interesting time. The gas station I worked at, the people that the customers and the people that ran it, they pretty much liked Chevrolet products and GM products. Up the street, about a half a mile north, another friend of mine owned a gas station, and he liked Chrysler products, and his name was Jimmy Addison. And he had this one car that was known as the Silver Bullet, which is pretty famous today. And many people say that all in all, he was the fastest car for a long period of time on Woodward Avenue. I was friends with him, but we wouldn't talk cars too much because he knew that me and my friends, we liked Chevys and he liked Chryslers. But we'd visit each other. Sometimes me and my friends would go to his gas station, and we kind of did this kind of often, where at lunchtime we'd talk him into closing up his gas station, and we'd go out to lunch, and we'd go to this one bar restaurant that was almost across the street from the Shell station I worked at. At the time it was called the 90s Bar. Today it's called Dugan's. Oh. And we'd play pool in the afternoon, where actually we got him to close his gas station for 3-4 hours and play pool with us. And we used to do that. And I was supposed to be going to school. Sometimes I'd skip school.
So he was the professional driver. Well, both stations were professional drivers, but he was
my one boss at the gas station, he was a professional auto racer, and after he got out of the gas station business, I continued working for him as I went to school, and we'd travel across the country and race other auto racers as well. Drag racing, probably its high point was probably in the 1970s. It used to draw large crowds, and the people that we raced against today are iconic auto drag racers. And we'd go out west or out east. Sometimes we'd be gone for long periods of time, and they were backed by the automotive, the big three factories, and as well as local auto dealerships.
Yeah, so they had the sponsorship that you really needed to get out there. See, racing to me is really, really interesting. And you were the epitome because you grew up knowing the drivers, you knew the race cars and everything like that. So what I would like to do is just learn more about your racing, and not you driving, but what is it like to be on the pit crew and things like that. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we're going to segue right into the next segment, if you would, but just introduce us to that portion.
Well, my one boss that was the drag racer, he did rather well, and he was a national record holder and was able to get good sponsors. In 1973, he got American Motors to sponsor him.
Why don't we hold that just a second? We're going to take a little break because it sounds to me like we're about to get in something very interesting. So why don't we take a little break, and we'll be right back with my friend Charlie Peringian, and he's going to tell us all about his racing, part of his hobby. We'll be right back.
Catch us anytime on YouTube. Go to Oxford Community Television YouTube.
Welcome back. We're with my friend Charlie Peringian. We were talking about his experience at the racetrack, watching the racers and everything, and we were getting into this thing. It's very interesting. Charlie's got a lot to say. So tell us, Charlie, about when you were at the racetrack, you would get to meet these people and their drivers and everything. Tell us about that.
Well, it was fun and it was exciting. And then the people I worked for, they strived very hard to always try to make their cars faster. We would lots of times work very late at night to improve the performance. And lots of times they were just experimenting. It taught me a lot later on in life to help me out with my bumping and painting projects and whatever, and that deadlines are important, and that try to do the best that you can always, and to be a little creative.
Well, that's the life that you've got right now. That's your philosophy in life, isn't it? To do the best you can do, be as creative and be as fair as you can. Well, now, you've got a hobby of cars as well. Did that grow out of your time with the racers and everything, your hobby of having cars?
Well, I always liked cars, and they were always my hobby, and working for the racers was just a passing thing, because in the middle 70s the drag racing declined with the oil embargoes and whatever. Yeah. And but I always liked cars, and they continued to be my interest and hobby.
Now, do you still have any of the cars now?
I have old cars now, and I take them to car events, and I belong to a few car clubs, and it's kind of a fun thing to do.
Well, what car clubs do you belong to? Can you think of any right now? What's your favorite right now that you've
Well, the club that I'm most active in, I've been a member since the middle 70s. It used to be called the Oakland County 55 through 57 Classic Chevy Car Club, but unfortunately, me and the current president of our club, we were the youngest members, and the older ones have passed on, where we recently had to rename the club to the Mid-Michigan Classic Car Club, and we allow different makes of cars in the car club, not only 55 through 57 Chevys.
That's so interesting. And did you work on your cars? When you bought them, did you buy them as rebuilds? How do you have to rebuild them? Or did you get them already ready to go for the shows?
Well, when I look at a car, thinking of purchasing it, I always look for a car that has a really good body on it. You don't want a car that's been rusted out and pieced back together if at all possible. You'd want a car that's solid and original. And then the nicer the car that you buy, the better off you really are. If you don't have to do any work to it, it's better that you don't. Yeah. And so you try to find a car that is as close to being like new as you can find. It's worth paying the extra money. In the long run, it's a better investment and it saves you money.
Now, did you ever you mentioned sometimes you'd have to work on the bodies and to get them right and everything. Did that tweak your knowledge on body work at that time?
Well, working for the auto racers helped me because we used to put cars together that were a tube chassis with fiberglass and metal body panels put together. So that's really building a car from scratch. And then later on, repairing accidents in my auto body shop, we had to take cars apart, and a lot of your cars are welded together, and then re-weld them back together, and again, that's just all part of fixing a car.
Yeah, I remember your body shop, and you did beautiful work at that time. You're retired from that now?
Yes, I retired in 2007.
Yeah, and so I remember it was in Troy, was it? Was it in Troy?
Yeah, my business was in Troy, yes.
Yeah.
I was there for about 35 years. How I started out was I rented a portion of the large building that my drag racer bosses were in, and they shared the building with another friend of mine who I used to help out, and he was a professional drag racer as well. And I'd help them on their cars, and then I'd fix my friends' cars as well, and my own stuff.
You did a great job. I've seen your work. Your shop was right in the middle of all these businesses and everything, but you couldn't find it. It didn't have a big monster sign. It didn't look like an auto body shop. It was in the back of one of the buildings or close to one of the buildings. Is that right?
Well, my shop that I stayed at, that I moved into in 1979 after I moved out of the building that my auto racer friends were in. I stayed there till 1979, and it was on the north end of a street in Troy, but it wasn't on the main roads because I really didn't need any main road advertising.
Yeah. Now you moved into Addison Township a long time ago. You've lived here for years and years.
In the middle 70s, I moved to Addison Township.
And you have your cars at your place. And did you get involved with the township at all during that time, other than the parks and recs that we'll talk about later? Did you get any involvement? You were with the parks years ago.
Well, I'm an original member of the Addison Township Parks Committee. I'm probably the person responsible in talking them into buying all this parkland that they have. But it's important to try to preserve some of what we have.
So why don't we'll talk about that on the next segment, because I know this is something dear to your heart, that you would like to talk about the parks and the plant life that you've got to watch out for, and things like that. But now back to your body work and everything like that. Let's talk. You got involved with a little bit of GM work. Was that it, in painting?
Well, back in the 70s, being that I worked with these auto drag racers that were pretty much, they were the best in the area, perhaps some of the top people in the country, and a lot of people knew that we could do a lot of things that most people couldn't do. A lot of the automotive photography work was done in the Troy area and in the Detroit area for the big three. And a lot of the photographic agencies were very close by to me, where they approached me to do things for like next year's models, painting, changing things around. Everything had to be done by hand in the old days when analog cameras were used before the digital era. If you wanted to take a photo of a red car, you had to paint it red. You just couldn't tell the computer to change the program and make it red. If you wanted to change the trim and make it next year's model, you had to physically do it, where today you can blow up the digital print, change the dots around, shrink it back down, and you don't need to go through all that work. So everything had to be done by hand in the old days, where I started out with American Motors. We did a lot of Chrysler, and eventually most of the work I did in the 80s and 90s was for General Motors and their local photographers, their ad agencies, and their headquarters themselves. And we do next year's cars for catalog. We do prepare cars for TV commercials, magazine ads, display. And most of the time they were giving me pilot cars, and I'd make next year's cars out of them. They'd have me paint cars with this paint called peel coat paint, which was a little bit unusual. A lot of these pilot cars, they didn't want to ruin the finishes on them and paint them something else other than what they came with new, and they'd have me paint them with this paint that peeled off later in sheets.
That's something I want to talk about in the next segment. That's so interesting. That's going to take a little bit of time. How did the advertisers contact you? How did they know about you and your painting ability?
Well, again, it was from my work with the automotive drag racers that I worked with. They knew that we could do things in a short frame time, and we wouldn't let anyone down.
Yeah.
And so most people couldn't do that.
Yeah, that was back to your philosophy: do it fast to get it done right, and be proud of your work, huh?
Well, that's pretty much it.
But they got to know you through the painting and everything, and then you were approached by the advertisers saying, we need your help, and to come out with some way to paint the cars and on the fly, if you will, paint it red, then we need it painted blue or something. And you came out with a interesting way of doing that, didn't you? Of painting them different colors. The peel coat, I believe that's what you referred to?
They'd have me paint them with this paint called peel coat, which I painted hundreds of cars that way, where one car, I could make it look like 5 or 6 different cars just by painting it and changing the trim so they could use it for next year's catalog.
Now, did you come out with the peel coat? Did you make it? Or
No, that
was
was
it
a product that was already out there, but most people didn't know about it. And it was like spraying a trash can liner on a car and then putting automotive paint on top of it. You had to be very careful with this stuff, because when you went to pull the masking tape off of it, you could pull off sheets of paint if you didn't know what you were doing. So I had to kind of tape the cars unorthodoxly to be able to do this, and then be very careful putting them back together. And then the auto companies kind of got fussy the last few years I was doing this, where they even had me wet sanding and polishing these cars with buffing wheels, and I was always on guard and worried about the paint peeling off as I'm polishing it with the buffing wheel.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
So you really got involved with that, and you were involved with the GM and Chrysler, all the automotive industry, doing the advertising. And is there anything else you would like to tell us on this first segment about the way you did the painting and how they would contact you? Did you go out to the job site or out to the site and paint?
Sometimes they would take me with them on their photo shoots, just in case if something bad happened, I could Band-Aid fix it right away, because they'd have so much money and time and cameras and people there and their sets that they couldn't afford to come back the next day and do it.
Yeah.
And so they'd want to do it, one time and be done with it. They also, lots of times, the stuff that they had me do was top secret, where they'd be watching to make sure that as we move the cars in and out of the shop, that no one from any other auto company or any magazine company were watching what we were doing.
That's right, you were doing the year ahead.
Yeah, we were doing stuff in advance. And most of the stuff got moved in enclosed trucks, these big reliable trucks. They would back up to the door, and we would sometimes wrap the cars in paper, so if someone did try to get a glimpse of what we were doing, they couldn't really see what we were transporting.
So did you wrap them in your shop and then try to load them up in the trailers and get them all secret?
That's what we kind of did.
You felt pretty privileged that you got to see the new cars. Did you want to tell anybody about them? Say, oh, you got to see this new car. It's going to be great.
Well, my friends would come over and they'd get a glimpse of what was going on, but they would just promise not to tell anybody.
Mm-hmm. Promise not to say anything.
But again, when it was analog, everything had to be done by hand, where today it's a completely different world. All these people that I worked for, which were famous, local, renowned photographers that had large studios and big staffs, all went away.
Yeah.
With the digital camera and programs that could tell you to make this car a different color, highlight it the same way, blow it up, change the dots around, make the grille different, make the wheels different. This work didn't need to be done anymore.
Yeah. Did you ever have to change over grills or anything like that, or just the paint when you were doing it?
Well, they had me do everything.
Really?
Yeah. They had me paint skeletons, just parts of cars, whatever the job took. I did a lot of skeletons where they'd use them for a display. The photographers also got into other stuff besides the automotive. I did work for large corporations that were in the area. They'd have me paint aftermarket parts, things that weren't even automotive. I've even filled up my spray room full of suitcases and painted them for a suitcase company.
Really?
And it's all part of the advertising world.
Yeah. Now, what is the skeleton of a car when you say you've painted the skeleton?
Well, the basic structure of the car, the floors, the door pillars, the roof, the firewall, everything else bolts onto a car.
So you painted just the pieces, and then so they could use them for advertising and things like that. Mm-hmm. Well, I tell you what, Charlie,
They'd have me paint things even like crash zones on a car. So when a car folded up, you could tell which areas were going to fold up, and I'd paint them different colors.
Okay, why don't we hold that thought,
Yeah.
and we're going to wrap up this segment of My Life. I'm Ed Brakefield. This is my friend Charlie Peringian, and giving us an insight of his life, which is very, very interesting. Charlie's got a lot of good stuff to tell us, so we're going to wrap up this section of My Life, and thank you for joining us.